I'll narrow the material down for you in the slides. You'll be able to take a look at that. The GSIs will give you some sample questions as well, posting them on BSpace. Okay, so a week from today, exam number 1. Several of you, a smaller number, but a number of you have unfortunately not made it into the class yet because you're still on the wait list. That should be resolved by the end of this week, by the very latest early next week. So if you're still on the wait list, do not take the exam next Thursday. We won't be able to grade it. It won't count. So don't take the exam unless you're officially enrolled in the class. So again, red Scantron, pre-fill it out. Now, where we left off Tuesday, we were talking about some of the advantages and disadvantages of diagnosis. I didn't quite get to all the disadvantages, and what you may have noticed is as I was bringing up a disadvantage, I was bringing it up and then I was kind of providing a counter argument to illustrate that it may not be such a big disadvantage at all. That was true for capturing the uniqueness of the individual or a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not so much true for stigma. Stigma is still a big problem, but throwing out the diagnostic system is not going to solve stigma. So where we ended up here was, we went through these. We stopped here, poor reliability. So one of the disadvantages of diagnosis is if the system itself is not reliable, if Dr. A and Dr. B, if I don't agree with what Mike says the diagnosis is, that's a giant problem. And so there are some concerns about some of the changes that have been made in DSM-5 that actually might make the reliability worse. The concerns, this is an article that was written in the American Journal of Psychiatry, the concern is that the DSM-5 has kind of lowered its standard for what they're going to consider reliable. Time will tell, it's too early, it was just released in May. We don't really know how reliable this new system is, but just even before it was published, there was some worry about reliability. Here's just a table of, not in DSM-5, but in the DSM-4, the reliability for some diagnostic categories. And for many, it's very good. This metric of reliability ranges from 0, which is 0 reliability, to 1.0, which is perfect reliability. So the closer that number gets to 1.0 is very good reliability. So you can see avoiding personality disorder, the reliability is 0.97. That's really quite good. And in this particular sample, alcohol abuse was perfect reliability. But panic disorder in this particular study was not as good as the other ones. The reliability was only 0.65. So reliability continues to be an issue associated with DSM-5. It's better for some categories than others, but there is concern, and we'll just have to see with DSM-5 what happens to the reliability. Another disadvantage of a diagnostic system or the concept of diagnosis is that environmental influences might be ignored. People may not, in the service of coming up with a category that somebody fits in, they may completely neglect to take advantage of looking at their life as a whole. And this was the first disadvantage of criticism, where people are pigeonholed, they're put into a category. We don't consider their life context. And that shouldn't be a disadvantage, actually. It's supposed to be covered by the multi-axial system in DSM, but now it's still in the 4th hour, really it's technically the 2nd axis now in DSM-5, where people are supposed to consider the environmental context, the psychosocial stressors, what's happening in a person's life. Responsible mental health professionals should be considering other things that are happening in a person's life, not just lumping people together and they have a bipolar disorder and we don't need to care about what's happening in their life. Or they all meet criteria for conduct disorder, so who cares if some people have a good family environment and other people have a crappy family environment. A responsible clinician is not going to ignore the environment. So it shouldn't happen. We'll see what happens with DSM-5. They've preserved that axis that takes into account the environment and psychosocial stressors. And a final disadvantage or criticism of diagnosis is that it creates an illusion of understanding. And if any of you are philosophy majors or you've taken philosophy, you learn about tautological reasoning or circular reasoning. And that is a valid criticism or disadvantage of our current diagnostic system because we sometimes think we have more information than we do. So if somebody comes in and is saying that they're hearing voices and that they believe that the CIA is conducting an investigation on them and they're thinking it's disorganized, and we say, wow, what's wrong with them? We think, oh, they have schizophrenia. Oh, well, that's good. We understand what it is, right? But then we say, well, how do you know that that person has schizophrenia? Well, because he's hearing voices and he thinks that the CIA is conducting an investigation and his thinking is a little disorganized. So that's how we know it's schizophrenia. He has schizophrenia. So we're going around in a circle. We're using our symptoms. That helps us to make the diagnosis. But our diagnosis is also defining the thing that we're trying to do in the first place. So we sometimes think we have this sense of understanding when it's really a bit of a circular logic or reasoning that's happening here because we're using our diagnostic system, the DSM-5, to both define what is schizophrenia and to diagnose it. And so that's something that still could be worked on. So let's switch now and talk about assessment. Hang on, I'll come to your questions kind of at the end. We got behind with the whole microphone thing, so I want to make sure I get through this stuff. Assessment is using the tools that our field has in order to help make a diagnosis. That's certainly one reason why we would do it. Another reason we would do assessment is to try to get a bigger and broader picture of what's happening in a person's life at any given moment in time. So it's not just to make a diagnosis, although certainly we do assessment to make a diagnosis, but it's also to get a broader picture so that we take into account, for example, environmental influences. What's their current work life? What's their family life? What's their social life like? Where are they living? What's their, are they living in poverty? Do they have a reasonable amount of support? Do they have health insurance? All of these things can be done by doing a careful, broad, systematic assessment. So how do we do it? Well, there's lots of different tools, and I'm just going to give you some examples of some of them that the book talks about, not all of them. But one thing I remember from the outset is we do a dash through some of the assessment tools here and illustrate them for you, is that there's not one gold standard assessment tool in our field. So doing an fMRI brain scan is not the gold standard, or doing a structured clinical interview, or doing a personality assessment. One is not necessarily better than another. More is often the best way to do it. The more comprehensively you do an assessment, if you use more than one tool that we have at our disposal in our field, you're going to get a broader base, more comprehensive assessment of the things that are happening with that person who's come to you in your office with various symptoms or complaints. So more tools, not just which one is better, but more is often better. And as we do this dash through the different tools, you'll notice that some of these different assessment methods and tools come from the different paradigms that we talk about in Chapter 2, from neuroscience, cognitive behavioral paradigms in particular. We're not going to say too much about genetics yet, because that's still not, even though we can sequence the entire human genome, it's not useful for our field yet with respect to either making a diagnosis or understanding the specific mechanism for a particular problem. It will be, I would guess soon, within the next 5 to 10 years, but it's not there yet. So interviews are often the first stop on your tour of assessment devices. I take it you're here to help me with the microphone.
I'm here to try it.
To try to help me with the microphone. It wasn't working, and I'm just going to keep shouting while you're working.
Sure.
Interviews are usually the first stop on your assessment and these can be very informal, kind of, what's your name, what you're here to see today, to more structured. They're sometimes called semi-structured interviews, something like a SCID, which stands for the Structured Clinical Interview for DSM-4. They're going to be making one one for DSM-5. We just haven't done it yet because DSM-5 just came out, but it will be coming. And so here is what a structured clinical interview might look like, semi-structured, where if you see in the left-hand column there are some questions that you might ask to somebody who comes to you. So do you ever hear things that other people couldn't hear, like noises or the voices of people whispering or talking? So that's a question that you would ask during your interview. And over on the right column there, these are the symptoms that you're assessing for. These are whether or not somebody is having some hallucinations. So they are called semi-structured interviews because the questions that you ask are laid out for you, but it's semi-structured because the way in which you proceed to this interview, there's some flexibility. And also, depending on the answer that somebody gives you to a question, might suggest the kind of question that you would ask next. Now we're going to talk about the assessment of stress, which is important for almost any disorder that we'll be talking about this semester. And if you remember, in chapter 2, we didn't talk about this in class, but the book talked about the diathesis stress model. The idea behind the diathesis stress model is that there's some vulnerability to whether it's genetic or some neurobiological or even psychosocial vulnerability to developing a disorder, and that in combination with some stress increases the likelihood that a person may develop a disorder. So stress is important when it comes to all the disorders we're talking about. Now, there are lots of different ways of assessing stress. The best way to assess stress is in a fairly prime and labor-intensive way, using the LEDS. The LEDS is an acronym that stands for the Life Events and Difficulty Schedule. You don't have to remember what the acronym stands for, but I do want you to know what this method is. It's a kind of a semi-structured interview, like I showed you for diagnosis, that helps you as an assessor walk through different kinds of things that people may have experienced in their life, giving you specific criteria for defining particular stressful events. It gives over 5,000 case examples to help somebody who's rating different kinds of stressful life events. And importantly, it includes the context of life that a particular person is going through when they experience these events. So it's a very individualized approach to assessing stressful life events, which is important. Why? Because not all events that happen to people in life are equally stressful. It depends upon the person. It depends upon their life context. Somebody getting a divorce, for example, that could be horrifically stressful for somebody who is presented with that opportunity or dilemma completely out of the blue. For somebody who thought, well, my marriage is great, I mean, it's not good as it was, but a divorce, are you kidding me? Like, well, I've met someone else, holy smoke. That is, horrifying. But contrast that with somebody else who's getting a divorce because they're being abused by their spouse. And they can't wait to get through that divorce and make sure that restraining order follows them. That's like a sense of relief to get out of that relationship. So you can't consider all stressful events equally stressful for everybody because it varies depending upon the person and their life context. So the LEDS is very good at doing that. And so here's just an example of a timeline. These are a person who happened to have...
Yeah, it's okay. This power thing is killing us all over the place.
Okay.
Be a teacher, have to look at it.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
On the plus side, I can hear you just fine.
I know. Yeah, he can hear me up there. Yeah, I won't be able to talk. Yeah, after this, but
sorry about that.
Thanks for the effort.
Very soon.
Okay. Hopefully it'll be fixed by next Tuesday. So this is an example, a timeline of months for a particular person who had some different things that were happening to this person. And if you're doing the LEDS with somebody, this interview, you're walking through a person individually, helping them to kind of develop this timeline for when these stressful events happen. And you're working in a very systematic way with them, helping them to remember things because it is retrospective. And if you remember from our memory demonstration, our memories sometimes aren't that good, depending how far back we go. We fill in the gaps sometimes with things that may not have happened. So you're working with people to help with landmarks, say like New Year's Day, what was happening on New Year's Day, or around Valentine's Day, if you can remember it, helping them to recreate this and then mapping out these kinds of stressful life events. So the LED's a very powerful method for measuring stress. Now, all sorts of psychological tests, that's really in the wheelhouse of psychology. People often ask, well, what's the difference between getting a PhD in clinical psychology and, say, a master's in social work, or even a master's in psychology, a master's in social work? If you get graduate training in psychology, you're usually going to be learning how to do psychological testing, whereas you're not going to learn that in medical school if you want to be a psychiatrist. You're not going to learn that if you get a master's in social work. So if you're interested in psychological testing, psychological assessment, that you want to do some graduate training in psychology. So there are all sorts of psychological tests. Intelligence tests are something you're probably all familiar with. You've heard about these. You've probably taken them even. A lot of times these are used to assess children, but they're used to assess adults as well. And what does your intelligence have to do with mental illness? That just seems weird. Why do we care, about somebody's intelligence? Well, for some particular sorts of things like learning disabilities, for example, it's important to have an assessment of intelligence test because usually people with learning disabilities have very average or way above average intelligence. It's just a particular problem learning, whether it's reading in the case of dyslexia or math. But even something like schizophrenia, it can be helpful to have an intelligence test to determine oftentimes if there's been a change in people's general cognitive ability. And so somebody who was an honor student all through college and went to graduate school and got a top-flight job and then develops the symptoms of schizophrenia at age 28, and you give an IQ test at age 28 when they have schizophrenia, they score much lower than they did when they were in college and an honor student. So that's just a general indicator of the kinds of cognitive impairment that somebody with something like schizophrenia may have experienced. Another realm of tests that are used in psychologists learn how to give in some graduate programs are the broad class called projective tests. And the projective hypothesis, the idea behind these tests is that for some people, asking them about certain symptoms or things that they may be experiencing may be too difficult for them to just come right out and tell you. And so you may not see certain things if you ask people a very direct question. Instead, if you ask things in an indirect way, you can make inferences about some symptoms or things that have been happening with that person based on their responses to these indirect questions. And what are these indirect questions? Well, these indirect questions are usually things like this, things that you've heard about before, like things like giving people these very ambiguous things to look at, like a series of ink blots here. And you ask people, well, what do you see when you look at these ink blots here? What do you see? Now, we're not asking people, a direct question here, like, are you feeling sad or down nearly every day, or are you having urges, that you want to hurt someone, or have you been abused? Those are the direct approach. This is the indirect approach, where you just say, let's take this one right here, the bottom left corner here. What do you see when you look at that picture? So tell me, anybody, what do you see? A spider's head. What else? Two guns pointing down. Okay. Anybody? Yeah. A pelvic bone. Okay. Yeah. Wings. The backside wings of a bird. Wings of a bird. Anybody? Yeah. It looks like two dinosaurs cuddling. A vertebrae. Okay. So all of these are perfectly healthy responses, things that people would often report and see, like something like this. But if somebody said that they see that's the two heads of the apocalypse, respond. And if they gave that response to all of those pictures, very, oh, that's also the apocalypse, or that's definitely, the apocalypse, and that's Armageddon, those would be less typical kinds of responses. Now, I'm giving an exaggeration here. I mean, that, it's not difficult to make interpretations based on that. But when people tell, these seemingly innocuous, and they are innocuous, ambiguous pictures here, what you as the assessor does is that you carefully record what people are saying, and then you make interpretations based on that. Now, you don't just make stuff up, although I suppose irresponsible clinicians would make some stuff up. But there's a scoring system that goes with the actual Rorschach that tries to do a fairly good job of being reliable in interpreting the responses that people give. And it can tell you something about the person's personality, the kinds of symptoms that they may be experiencing. There's a pattern of responses that are consistent with depression. So if you have somebody who is just unable to come out and say that they're feeling depressed, they're like, no, I'm fine, you're really fine. But yet you can see a pattern here that suggests depression. Somebody had did you have a question? No. Okay. All right, here's another example of a projective test. Here where you show, I know it's a little hard to see, but a thematic apperception test, or the TAT. Here you give people other sorts of, they're not quite as ambiguous as this picture. And you ask people, hey, tell me a story about what you see in this picture. And then you as the assessor will write down the story. And then you'll make an interpretation of what it is that the person's telling you. So somebody give me a story for those of you who can see what that is. What are you seeing here? Anybody? Yes. A man who is mourning the death of his wife who is laying down on the bed. So he's overcome. All right? Yeah.
I think he was guilty, maybe cheated on his wife, or is it the other? Was that woman's bed?
So here it's a man who is not breathing. He's guilty because he cheated on his wife, who may be that woman who's laying in the bed. All right? Anybody else? Yes.
I thought this was a doctor who was seeing her.
A doctor who's seeing her. Okay. Yeah.
There's like he murdered his wife or lover.
Okay. So murdered his wife or lover. Yeah.
Like trying to figure out how he's gonna hide the evidence.
Trying to figure out how to hide the evidence. So that's the gist of it. As an assessor, you would be asking people to kind of tell you, elaborate on the story. And again, you're looking for patterns. There's not one of these cards. There's all sorts of different cards. And you're looking for the patterns, in how they describe things. Again, in the service of seeing if there's a consistent pattern in what they say that might reveal something about their personality, about the kinds of things that they're experiencing that are more difficult to get in a particular person who may not give you a direct answer. Now, there's also some objective personality tests here that you may have heard of. The NMPI is one of them. That's gone through several revisions. That's a giant 500-item test of true-false questions that people fill out that tells you something about people's personality, and it's shown there in that panel where you basically plot people's responses to the NMPI, and the two scales on the NMPI that people score highest on, those are the two salient aspects of a person's personality. There's another one called the Personality Assessment Inventory, or PAI. That is a personality inventory that's developed primarily with the idea of assessing the kinds of personality characteristics that are associated with personality disorders, something that we'll get to later in the semester. So the Personality Assessment Inventory, those items are geared towards assessing personality pathology, whereas the NMPI has items that are really designed to assess healthy personality characteristics. And it's only when people score in the extremes here, I'll show you a better picture here of an MMPI profile. I don't have a pointer, but do you see those two horizontal lines there that are kind of cutting across? Those are the averages of most people. Most people score in between. If you plotted their scores, it'd be in between those two things, those two horizontal lines. So you can see that this particular person is way above on all of those, and they're particularly high, and I don't know that this is legible, but on scale number 2 there, and then scale number 9. So that would be a 2-9 profile. This is an actual real MMPI of somebody with the initials JH, and I don't know if you can read the date, but it was given in 1981. Does anybody, I know most of you probably weren't born then, but something happened in 1981, a famous event splashed all over the news. It involved the president at the time, who was Ronald Reagan. And what happened to him, or if you read about it, you would remember. John Hinckley, that's right, that stands for John Hinckley. He said he attempted to assassinate then President Ronald Reagan, had a gun, shot at Reagan, shot his press secretary Jim Brady in the head, and he survived. So John Hinckley, we'll talk about him again at the end of the semester, somebody who was found not guilty by reason of insanity for that, and was not then sent to jail, but instead went to a forensic hospital in Washington, D.C. So that's his actual MMPI profile. Now, other kinds of assessments that psychologists do, cognitive behavioral assessments. Remember we talked about the cognitive behavioral paradigm. One key kind of assessment that people do is simple observations. In practice, it's not always that simple, but it's a little bit dark, but that's illustrating people looking onto a child's classroom from behind a window here. So simply, if you've got, let's say, a child who you think might have some problems with ADHD, you might go to the classroom and simply observe and see if that child is, in fact, having trouble staying in his or her seat, getting up all the time, is flipping pencils, is flipping the kid next to him, is interrupting the teacher all the time, is not raising hand, can't sit still, or stand still when in line to go to lunch or to recess. So all of those things you could do some observation and recording the behaviors that you see. Another kind of cognitive behavioral assessment are a lot of different self-report measures. So many of you may have done the pre-screening survey as part of RPP. And all of the things that you completed there were things that you often see in self-report questionnaires. So maybe some of you remember if you did this, there may have been a questionnaire in there that asked about symptoms of depression. You may not have known that's what it was, but that's commonly in the pre-screening survey. Or asking you questions about anxiety. So these are not always paper and pencil now, they're often done on computer.